Hey friends, it's Brett back with another episode of Seeking Our Spirit. Got a real good episode for you today. Got to sit down with an old friend of mine, Mr. Jordan Simmons of First Light Insurance Group. Had a great time getting to know parts of his story that I did not know, and get to dig in with him on his spiritual journey. So I hope that you enjoy. As always, appreciate all your support and encouragement. Keep hitting those like buttons and share buttons and share the episodes around with friends and family. As I've been saying, we're on YouTube now, so even if you don't listen there, go over there and hit subscribe or follow, so that that helps us out a lot too. And most importantly, come and be on the show. Come and tell your story. We'd love to have you. If you don't want to be on the show for a full conversation, call and leave me a message about a story of spirituality that you've had in your life, an experience maybe you've had. You can call me at 615-933-9737 and just leave a message and tell your story. That would be great. If you would like to be on the show, or you would like to talk about spiritual direction, contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com, and we'll keep it going. Appreciate those of you who have subscribed and hit the support button. Thanks so much for your contributions and helping us keep it going. I also want to say, Jordan didn't ask me to say this and doesn't know I'm saying this, but if you are in the market for insurance, or maybe thinking about changing insurance carriers, give Jordan a call. Look up First Light Insurance Group. I know Jordan personally. I've known him pretty much our whole lives, and I personally trust him, and he is just a great all-around person. So I can say that about him and about what he does, and I know that he'll take care of you. So reach out to him for any questions about insurance, and he'll steer you in the right direction. So appreciate it. Appreciate Jordan coming on, and hope you all enjoy. Peace. All right, so we're live. Welcome, Jordan. Good to have you with me. Thanks for coming and being willing to chat. As we just said before I hit record, that's the hard part of this. Is getting people. So I appreciate you, and I'm excited, man, because I've known you like most of our lives.
I know, right?
But have probably never sat and chatted in depth. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things throughout the years here and there, but so I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, no, first I'm honored that you would have me here. I appreciate it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's funny. I think there's probably a number of people that we could point to in our lives that like we've had these relationships with for a long time, but we probably have never sat down and like had a deep conversation with them. So,
yeah, for sure.
So that's cool. Now I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, so as we start off with everybody, why don't you just, for folks who don't know you, just give a little bio, who you are, where you're from, what you do, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I'm 37 and have lived in Knoxville my entire life. And I have a wife, Laura. We have been together for, let's see. Oh goodness. It's a bad time to not have to answer this. No, we met in 2012. And let's see, I guess we've been married for 8 years. And we now have 2 kids. So we've got a 5-year-old daughter, Liv, and a 2-year-old son, Jake. And we are just loving life with them right now for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's such a precious time, just with what ages they are. We're just really enjoying that part of our lives for sure.
Yeah.
Besides that, professionally, I have an independent insurance agency that I own, and I just love doing it. It's one of those things that I haven't been doing it that long yet, but I wake up every day just excited to get to work on this thing that I started. So it's been
What's
great.
That called for people listening?
Yeah, it's First Light Insurance Group. And if you want to see a little bit more about what we do, you can go to the website. It's firstlightinsurancegroup.com.
Yeah. Cool. I've really enjoyed some of the videos and stuff and clips you've been putting out. It's good.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it's not my forte, I would say.
It's good.
Something that I like run to, I would say. But, I think for just what I'm doing, I think it does provide a level of just interaction with the people that I'm trying to help. And, it's one of those now where I've kind of gotten out of the habit of really focusing on, I need to get back on it. But I have some help there too. I've got someone kind of behind the scenes that does help me just like with posting content and things like that, because again, that is not my strong suit. I'll sit there and look at one post for 3 hours and want to like move little things around before I put it out there.
Well, and we talked about this before we hit record, but it's similar to this podcast project. Like people don't understand how much time stuff like that would take, you know?
Yeah, it is. And it can be a little intimidating just to like even get started sometimes, you know, because you're like, okay, I know I want to do this, but you're also, then it starts to creep in where you're like, well, I don't want to put it out there if it's not like the best version of what it could be, you know? And sometimes you just have to pull the trigger and whatever happens is what it is.
So. Been there with this podcast thing for sure. Cool. Well, so spirituality, obviously subject of the day. And I guess as listeners know, and I've sort of covered with you, I'm basically, my whole thing is trying to, in a time and in our society, in our culture where people are trying to kind of divorce the terms spiritual and religious, especially in younger generations, I'm just very curious of like, what do we mean when we say spirituality? And so I find one of the best ways for me to sort of get a grasp on that is to see it through other people's eyes and their stories and what that word spirituality has meant to people. So for Jordan, when you think of that, where do you enter in? Would spirituality enter into your life through organized religion and being raised in a family and going to church, or is there a separate sort of inner spiritual life, or just where do you enter?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I guess the kind of all the above. Really, I mean, when I kind of think about, I mean, I knew we were going to be doing this, so I tried to like reflect a little bit, just like, and it was a neat experience in a way, just trying to reflect on my spiritual life, throughout my life. It's weird because I started out when I was a very young person, like a pretty spiritual person. I mean, I know it doesn't necessarily equate to spirituality, but like I remember I like only listened to Christian music. Like I listened to like DC Talk and Newsboys and Jars of Clay, Like
so where did that come from? Was that church life or?
Yeah, I think honestly, like if I'm being honest, a lot of growing up in my adolescence, I was always kind of a follower. So, it's like whatever my friends were into, I just kind of tagged along.
Yeah.
And I had a really good friend in the neighborhood that like, he was very involved, in church and, just, kind of more of the Christian, related things in general, I guess. Yeah. And that, we listened to the same music and, I remember kind of just wanting to be like him. So I think that kind of is what got me into it, but I think there was some real things there, and not like, it wasn't just like, I was like, everything was superficial. But.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. I'm really bad at like knocking stuff like that, like, just like pop Christian kind of music and stuff. But it's really, I shouldn't, because, and maybe this is where you were going, there's definitely got to be added benefit to when those are the lyrics that you're constantly sort of consuming, right? That has to have a positive sort of effect on somebody, as opposed to like, I was listening to Rage Against the Machine and Korn and, like whatever. I
definitely went
like
through that phase too.
Yeah. I still do, but
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's funny because like, this is not a knock at all on like Christian artists or Christian groups, but I think it honestly had more of an impact on me when I was younger.
Sure.
But now it doesn't as much anymore. And it's not really like because of what type of music it is or the lyrics or anything. It's just, sometimes I feel like we can't really control what we enjoy.
Yeah.
As far as music anyway. But anyway, yeah. So, I kind of started out like at the beginning, like very faith focused, if you will, I guess.
And did your family go to church a lot? Like, were you guys?
Yes. So when my parents were still together, we went to Sevier Heights Baptist, actually, when it was at the old location. So I know it's like kind of where the Bakers Creek, like mountain biking downhill is now. But, they moved to the big location there off Alcoa Highway. But before that, as a family, we went there, and you know, as it tends to happen, like when there's a split in the family, usually there's kind of like a split from that church too. I mean, I think that's not always the case, but usually maybe one or the other doesn't necessarily come anymore.
Yeah. How old were you when that happened?
I was 7 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, and that was, you know, hard on the whole family, obviously. But and I don't know that necessarily like separated me from my faith, but it separated me from church for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't really grow up in the church from that point on.
Oh, okay.
You know, and it took a long time for me to like find the church again, really. But I don't know that it necessarily coincided with my kind of a detachment from faith necessarily. Like I still kind of kept going with that. Like I had that good friend, and I remember that was kind of all through elementary school, where I was kind of on that. And then, you know, we kind of grew apart, that friend and I, and like with it, I kind of found other friends that were interested in other things. And it just, again, I was always just kind of like a follower, and would just kind of tag along to whatever was big in that group of people. And
just so like exposed to faith and spirituality through church, and then, as you said, naming music influence in a friendship. So sort of for Jordan, like kind of spirituality was at least traditional Christian, you know, faith.
Yeah, I would say so.
And then, okay. Well, and then, I don't know what comes next for you. Like,
yeah. And it's funny just trying to like put the pieces back together when I was kind of like thinking about my timeline. You know, I can't say that it was like definitive, but there was definitely a time when I just, for whatever reason, it just became less of a part of my life.
Sure.
You know, it just kind of, you know, our families didn't really go to church. You know, I had friends that did, you know, Adam being one of them. And I would visit, you know, like when I would go with others. And I think deep down, I always still felt like I was a Christian, but you know, it was kind of a very, you know, a candle burning in the basement, you know, not really anything that I really focused on as a big part of my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's part of what I'm so interested in is even outside of these categories of Christian or church or what denomination or whatever is like that inner life, right?
Yeah.
So like some people maybe didn't have any of what you just named, and yet they've always had this sense or this awareness of something, right? God, higher power, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And so like had that kind of inner life. We would call it prayer. I mean, maybe it's meditation or whatever. And so that just fascinates me, like where that comes from for people. You know?
No, it is. And even looking back on, you know, just big parts of my life, and, you know, I don't know again that I was conscious of it really like growing up, but I can kind of look back and see whether maybe it was just a stirring of emotions or, you know, just something like memories with friends or things that I did that were just, looking back now, I kind of do feel like that was intervention from the Holy Spirit, you know, whatever circumstances it was. But,
would you say, so sort of childhood, Baptist church, friendship, music, like, did you have like what we would call like a prayer life? Was there an inner, or was it more just outside?
Yeah, not really. Not for a long time. I mean, I think especially like during I would say probably like middle school through high school and probably even college, you know, I think there were little run-ins with it, you know, and like any sort of like formal thought given to it.
Yeah.
But not really, it just wasn't, it was something that had kind of just slipped so far out of my life that it just wasn't even that concerning to me.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's hard for me to even remember kind of how I felt about spirituality and all that during that time. I mean, I remember being stirred and moved by a lot of different things, you know, like whether it was music or, you know, just like feeling that closeness with my friends. You know, I grew up with the same group of guys for a really long time, and I remember just feeling like so attached to that.
Yeah,
like
and you guys went through some, going through some stuff, and you do it together, you know. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, just kind of feeling that sense of community, and
that's, I mean, so I feel like I'm always apologizing on this podcast to listeners because I use the same phrases all the time, but so I notice as I talk to people what I call like languages. So, and the different ways that this thing we call God might talk to us. And that is, I mean, you're naming like one way I see in people, that is pretty common. And I think we probably overlook it. But it is through relationships. It is through other people, right? Which is actually, you know, probably from the beginning, you know, of, well, definitely Christianity, maybe all theology. I mean, that's a traditional sort of thought teaching idea that we experience the face of God in others, right?
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So in childhood and adolescence then, because we're sort of just broadly talking about those things, do you have are there any, and sorry to put you on the spot, and the answer can be no, it's totally fine, but like, do you have any like touchstone moments that you would call some sort of quote unquote spiritual experience or not?
You know, probably not really. Nothing that I would kind of point to as like a very significant event and then acknowledged it as a spiritual interaction or anything like that. You know, I think there probably, again, like just reflecting on that part of my life, I think there probably were those things, but I just didn't have any focus. So it's like I just didn't see it, you know?
And if you're not like maybe in a context, like a church context, you almost don't even have the language for it, right?
Yeah. And that was a big part of, you know, kind of my fear, you know, of getting back into a church, you know, is like feeling like I was so far removed from like that language and the nomenclature, all those things that almost felt like there was almost like this imposter syndrome of like, well, I don't know anything and everybody's going to know it. You know? And so anyway, that, but I'm so glad that I was able to get past that because then it kind of like just once I got past that, it was like just completely different than I think what I was expecting.
And when did you do that?
That was, you know, it was interesting because it was kind of the cart before the horse in some ways. Like, my wife and I were pregnant with Liv, and we were just kind of like, you know, we feel like it would be right for our family to try to get involved in the church, and like we wanted our kids to grow up in the church. And
now, did she grow up real churched or not really?
A little bit, I think so. I think similar to me. I think she kind of had like an early habitual, you know, church life, but then just kind of again got sucked into the teen years and everything else.
It's common story.
Yes,
for sure. But what's the reason I asked is what's interesting to me about that is like I would have expected in your decision, you know, as you're approaching your parenthood to sort of to value that and look for it. I would have expected you to say that one of you had this familial kind of background in the church. But so it's really kind of interesting that you both had similar stories, not really attached to it, and yet as you were approaching parenthood felt that was...
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think it was, it is kind of interesting because I remember I was honestly the one that was still probably had more of a hesitation there because, again, I just kind of felt like, I was like, well, I didn't really grow up in the church, and it's like, I kind of felt like I was...
And I'm okay, right?
Or, I mean, maybe some of that, but also, like, I felt bad, like, now, you know, I don't know, like that, you know, that I wasn't going to be able to really share that with my kids, you know, because this was going to all be new to all of us, really.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I
That's
remember
kind of cool though, right? That like it's
Yeah.
like a journey you go on together. you know?
Yeah, I mean, actually, Liv and I got baptized together, like on the same day,
wow, that's
I was
powerful.
like holding her,
Wow.
and I got baptized with her. So
That's
that was
powerful,
really cool.
man.
Yeah, it was
That's
neat.
a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
I don't know that I knew that. You just gave me several thoughts there. So it's, I've kind of lost it, but you tell me if this doesn't resonate, but I feel like, in my generation and more so in y'all's generation, and I think it's even increasingly getting this way, that again, I sort of named that separation of spiritual and religious. That's happening more and more. And I think a lot of it is just unfortunate if we're being honest about the reality of churches and cultures. Like, I don't know that it feels all that inviting. I guess I'm sort of supporting you in that resistance because, a lot of people have a lot of negative experiences of organized religion and come out with baggage and trauma. And we all know those people. And, so I could see part of you being like, why do I need that?
Yeah. And I think it can be such in some cases, a private or kind of touchy place, with every person, because it's whether or not if you're like me and you really didn't learn much theology or scripture growing up, it's like, I think I still had like this view that, this should be all positive and good and there shouldn't be any negative things about it.
Right.
And I think going into back into the church, I was like, well, I feel like I'm going to be presented with some things where like, they're going to say this is bad or that,
right.
I mean, it feels kind of silly now. Now that I'm back in it, but I think that was just kind of my perception.
There are some places like that.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Yeah.
Yeah. Something that I don't want to lose. Like I was thinking about, because I know thinking about you before we started this. And one thing I was curious about, because I know part of your story, and feel free, I don't want to put words in your mouth here. So
sure.
At some point in your life, I don't know if that was middle school or high school, you got real intense in terms of like health and wellness and physical fitness and everything, which is awesome. And it's something I admire about you. I think it's very inspiring, your dedication and all that. But I just wonder, is that purely that, or is that sort of, could you call that a spiritual aspect of your life? I mean,
absolutely. No. Well, and let me just say too, that like now that I've gotten more focused on my spirituality and just, we'll kind of just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I feel like now that it's kind of like, the way I explain it to people is like, say you like a certain type of car or truck or whatever, and then all of a sudden you start seeing that truck everywhere.
Yeah.
It's
sure.
like now I kind of feel the same way about my spirituality, where I can look back at certain things or parts of my life and feel like that those things were presented to me or I was moved to do them for a reason.
Yeah.
And that kind of being one of them, I think that sometimes, and this is just how I feel about it, I feel that, God kind of realizes what moves us and he sets us up for success. In some cases, he'll bring these opportunities to us to fulfill these callings that we have.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky that I found, that part of my life, because now I just can't imagine it being any different.
Yeah.
And it's funny if I ever feel like that part of my life starts to get encroached on, or if it's like missing for any period of time, it's like I'm just not the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, and especially as I don't know if I could necessarily say in every case, like while I'm doing it, like while I'm like doing exercise or anything like that, it's hard to explain, but I feel like it's how I'm supposed to feel and be. And
I get that. I mean, there's something very, I guess part of my motivation for asking that is just because I see it in my story. Speaking of parenthood, like, I mean, I had a really disciplined spiritual life before I became a parent, and that has never been the same. And that's fine, but I had to find other ways. And so one of the ways that I had to make, one of the ways I found that is I had to make my running like prayer time. And so it's a little harder to do like lifting weights or something. I mean, cardio, you zone out, you know.
Right. Kind of that steady state, you can just go and
And I always have loved running and I loved that sort of like, I don't even know where I go. You know, it was very meditational to me, but, or meditative, but I found myself recognizing like, this is literally the only time I have. And so as I was stretching, I would say, okay, God, this is the time I got. So, you know, talk to me, you know? And I just would sort of let my mind wander and listen and whatever while I was running. And I sort of would, it's like set and setting. Like I would like mark that time and set it apart as like a prayer. So that was sort of my motivator for asking that. On the other hand, something that occurs to me, and I don't know if this connects with you, because so in terms of exercise and stuff, most of my life I've been a runner. I never got into like weights and things like that until very recently. And something that I do find very spiritual about that, there's something about it's akin to when you go and you garden or you go and you dig in the earth. Like I used to say this about when I worked landscaping. Yeah. Like there was something, and I still miss it. There's something about like getting in the earth and working with the earth that like felt so right. It's similar. Like when I'm doing resistance stuff, and maybe it's just because it's just who we are and what we are, but there's something that just, I don't know, it just feels deeper to me.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way for sure. And I think sometimes it makes me like happy to feel like I'm kind of doing what I was designed to do, you know, in some ways, like, you know, I know that
we're not designed to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and watch Netflix for hours. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. It's, and also it's, you know, the world we live in, there's just so much input all the time, and it's really hard to find something where you just don't have all that and you're kind of separated from it. And I know that there's people still find a lot of joy and happiness if they, you know, still have their phone and they're listening to music or whatever. And I like that too. I like to listen to music sometimes, but it's also just something that really detaches me from the rest of my life. Yeah. And so it kind of like resets my brain. And it just, I think it helps me be better in the other parts of my life. Yeah. You know, because it's, as a parent, you mentioned it. I mean, you're hardly ever alone anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, some other things you're reminding me of is like, I used to like double dip, and I would listen to all these podcasts and everything while I ran or worked out or whatever. And now to that point, I don't do that anymore because it was just more input. And so like now I guess in a way I still treat working out and other forms of exercise as like prayer in a way, because it's my time to like let go and process and unwind. Yeah. And the other thing that you reminded me of is, now I don't know if this is always there or if this comes from being active, but I can feel in my body. And I think this gets to like almost evolutionarily, like where we come from, that we're not meant to just sit around. Like, you know, we used to chase animals, you know what I mean? It's like I can feel in my body if I haven't expended that energy. Yes. Yeah. Like an anxiety. Yeah. And I'll just tell, Carla knows, like, and I have to go, even if it's just walking, I just have to go burn some energy. Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. I mean, it's, you know, it still happens where, you know, I think, you know, for me, I have like a set number of days a week that I like to do it. And if I feel like I haven't, or if there's something gets in my way of doing that, you know, those days when I normally would be moving, you know, whether it's all in my head or what, but I feel very different, you know, and I feel like it's just a huge part of my daily life now that is just very important for me, kind of being
who I am and functioning, really.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think, and just having that mental break, I think it's just huge. And I think it is more beneficial than we probably even realize. You know, because obviously if you do it, then you don't know what it's like not to do it.
Yeah. And there's also another aspect, and this is sort of getting in the weeds, but like, this is in exercise, this is in diet, this is just in life. Mm-hmm. And I feel like as I'm going to say these two words, like it's almost like they just go in one ear and out the other. But I think they're vital to making humans whole, which I would say is spirituality.
Yeah.
But intention and discipline.
Yes.
Like discipline is freedom.
Yeah.
And you see this in so many different aspects of life, or it's like, you know, like Jordan Peterson, like will say, like, make your bed, just start with that. Like get up and make the bed, like do the thing. And so I don't know. I see that all throughout. Again, I think as we even say those words, people just go, okay, yeah, intentionality and discipline. But when you're engaging in a long practice or being disciplined about the food you're eating or whatever, people see that as so boring and so like, ugh, or like torture, but it's actually awesome.
Yeah, and I'm so lucky because like I literally like get like butterflies in my stomach like anytime I'm presented with some sort of like disciplinary challenge or something like that. So yeah, I'm very weird, but it is, I forget who it was, but there was some sort of podcast or video that I saw where it's like, you know, he was kind of talking about that, like how this like discipline is, you know, it is that. I mean, motivation will let you down, but you know, discipline won't. Mm-hmm. And his point was, you know, he's like, you can look in the mirror after working out one day and be like, well, that didn't do anything, I'm done. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, but if you do it for, you know, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, then you start to see some changes. Yeah. You know, and it's like, it just takes a while. And I think that's why it's so hard, is because it's not instant gratification at all.
Right.
You don't see some of these things show up for a long time.
Yeah. And it's the same in spiritual practices. So like I teach people all the time, like people will come and say like, I need a new prayer practice, or I need, you know, whatever, or I've never been exposed to more contemplative meditation kind of stuff. And so I have tons of stuff I can teach people, but I always make a point of saying people make the mistake of thinking, just like the analogy of the workout, that it's the like, I'm going to sit down and I do this centering prayer for 20 minutes and I'm going to see God, you know? Yeah, and I'm always careful to say, it's actually just like with working out or diet or whatever, the benefit is in the life. Yeah. It's not in that moment. Mm-hmm. So like to stick with the body stuff analogies, even though it's not present in this, like it's like spiritual disciplines work a certain muscle in your brain or your soul or whatever, so that when you're living your everyday life, you're much more apt to see this thing we call God active, you know?
I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think I've seen that work even in my own life, because, you know, once Laura and I did get involved in the church, like when we first went, it was kind of hard, you know, honestly, because it was new. I mean, just from a very, you know, sounds bad, but from a practical standpoint, it was more time. Oh yeah. You know, it's like something else we had on our schedule to do, and we're terrible at saying no. So there's that. But you know, it was like, it took a while for us to really start to like, you know, quote unquote, feel anything. Yeah. You know, because it was like, we knew this was good. Yeah. We knew we wanted to do it. But it just took a while for us to like really start to like feel that like conjuring in us, that we're like, it went a step further than just like going because we knew it was a good thing and wanted to do it kind of thing. And that was really cool. Mm-hmm. You know, it was like all of a sudden it's like you just felt so much closer, not just to that, you know, discipline or whatever, that process, or God, but just, you know, to me, that's really with anything you're doing, not just with spirituality or, you know, whether it's physical exercise or whatever, anytime you make a commitment to doing something and then you start to see a change. You know, that's just a rewarding experience, and it's always encouraged me to like know that that can happen and will happen if I can do the same thing in other parts of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think, well, so, I don't know. It's probably, there's not even a good segue to this, but you just sparked me like so many people approach organized religion and probably just even spiritual practice. Like I think even if you talk to somebody who's like, I don't know, says they're pagan or Wiccan or whatever, or yogi, or, you know, it's like so much of our society and culture now approaches stuff in terms of like feeding us the benefit for us. Whereas really the motivator to worship is supposed to be gratitude. Like we're motivated to do that, to say thanks, you know, and that's gotten sort of turned around for whatever reason. I want to just hit this, and you don't even have to react to it, but you said something earlier that I just don't want to lose. And we talked about looking back on life and seeing sort of where, you know, God was at play or was presenting opportunities in your life. I love that. And that's been coming back a lot in some of the conversations I've had of this, like the long arc of our story, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I think those are really, it's really powerful. And I don't want to repeat or get too deep into it, but I've been talking with people recently about, I've experienced that in my own life, through this, I don't know if you know what the Enneagram is, but through work with that, and just being able to look back and go, oh man, like, I mean, I always knew that, but I've just seen it in much clearer ways of being put in situations I didn't want to be in, I didn't like, that stretched me and made me a more whole person, more completely myself.
Yeah, no, it's
in like crazy ways that to me just can't be coincidental.
Right.
It's weird. Like,
and it's cool to hear you say that, because I feel the same way. Like there are so many things that ended up getting, whether it was me choosing to do it or it just was kind of right there in front of me, and I felt like I didn't have a choice, but I needed to do it or whatever. But there's so many things I can look back on that I feel like now there's just no way it was a coincidence. And you can kind of like tie it back to the present of like why that was so important that happened. And so that's what I think about a lot. I mean, it can be really small things, or like something I think about a lot, is before like 10 years ago, I guess, like I really wasn't much of a reader. Like I, read the books that they made us read in high school or middle school or whatever. But like one day, like Laura and I were getting her car washed because we were getting ready to sell it, and Barnes and Noble was across the street. And so I just wandered in there and like bought 3 books, and just from that day forward, I like got interested in it. And it's weird how this chain reaction happened from that point on, of where all of a sudden I just it just opened up this whole new part of my life, and just like I learned so many things that I would have never learned, had I not been moved to just go walk in that bookstore that day, know. I mean, maybe who knows, maybe I would have still found some other way to get into it. But for me, that was like, it's funny because I can remember that day and that kind of being the start of it.
What do you remember what you picked up?
The only one I can remember is Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body.
Okay.
Which to this day I still have not read cover to cover. But what it like just kind of got me interested in Tim Ferriss, and then I started listening to his podcast, and he had all these interesting people on there, and like some of them had written books, so I'd go and read their books, and then I would kind of like, well, I want to read more books like that because this was cool. I like this, and it just kind of get me going down the path. And to where now it's like a very integral part of my life, and I feel like it's really important to me to like constantly be learning, and especially if there's something I'm interested in. Like now, I just try to go find a book on it. But like as before, I don't think I would have thought to do that. Which sounds weird.
So I feel like in terms of your timeline, we've sort of talked childhood and adolescence, but we really sort of built up to this moment of I mean, you named baptism, right? So you all finding your way into a church community and embracing that. I mean, well, first, is there anything that we're missing from prior to that you would want to name or talk about?
Not really, no. I mean, because as bad as it sounds, like, I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've lived a wonderful life. I think just my group of friends, my family. I'm truly blessed that I've been that I have the life that I do and grew up the way that I did. But not really. I mean, as far as from a spiritual standpoint, I mean, that's probably like the next big milestone was kind of at that point when Laura and I knew we wanted to kind of shift our focus to it, but didn't really know what we were even getting into.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
So I mean, what do you have there? I mean, you take this adventure on and what happens? What does that look like?
Well, so I remember having that conversation with Laura and, we live just down the street from our church.
Okay.
And so we were like, well, let's start there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
we can travel walk there. Time. Yeah, right.
So we did that. And, I met one of the pastors there. I don't think he would mind me mentioning him. I hope not. But Mark Lampley. And we just told him, hey, we're just interested in the church. Like, being honest, don't really know much about church in general.
Yeah.
So, what do we do? And he was so good. He came down to our house. And I still remember it because our air conditioner had just gone out. And so he came over and sat in our living room and like, we're all just like sweating, like sitting in the living room.
Yeah.
It's like August or something. But he was so good. I was like, well, let me at least get you some water or something. But he just told us a little bit about the church. And I remember I had like all these like, just like, to me, it's like kind of funny now looking back on it, but just like these random questions where I was like, well, what do I wear?
Yeah.
Like little things like that.
Yeah.
Cause I was like, I don't want to be walking in and, flip flops, or anything if I'm not supposed to. And, he was like so humble about it. He was obviously encouraged me to like wear whatever. He's like, whatever you feel like you need to. And he's like, I would say most people wear this or whatever. So it was good. But, it's just funny because there was not a lot of spirituality in that decision or like that beginning. It was more so like we felt like we were doing it for our kids and we wanted them to be exposed to church and all this. And anyway, so we started going and like in the middle of it, COVID happened too. So it kind of like put a huge roadblock in it. So we like didn't go, but like, we would pull up the live feed sometimes. And during that process too, our church took on a new head pastor, which at the time, we didn't even really know him that well because like it was COVID and nobody really knew him that well, I guess, in some cases. But for some reason, like when we started getting back into it and people started coming back into the church, like I really felt a strong connection with him. Like just when I would listen to him preach and, I'll be honest, like a lot of preachers that I had heard like growing up, like some of it just felt over my head.
Yeah.
Like I was kind of like, I'm not really, I feel like there's some good stuff here, but I'm just not, well-versed enough in scripture or theology to know what you're talking about.
Right.
But anyway, like he just had such a great way of like presenting his sermons, and I really kind of fell in love with it. And kind of part of that did keep us, very interested in going. And, Mark was great. Like he kept encouraging me to just get involved, so like I started going to this men's group with him and some other guys. And then I started on the young adult fellowship committee, and the international missions committee. So, I kind of had like, now I was kind of plugged into these little groups in the church. And, I still kind of felt the same way, that I was kind of just like, okay, I'm trying to just get involved. Like, I really want to see like what can happen here. And sure enough, I mean, little by little, I just started to like, something changed, over time, where I was like, it didn't really necessarily feel like it was another thing on my schedule that I had to go and do. It was more like I kind of did thirst a little bit for like that feeling or that what I would get from like either the men's group or just hearing other members, talk about whatever, going on in their lives. And it also kind of like changed my perception of like, well, these are just other people, that are just like me.
Right.
And they're
Trying to do life.
yeah,
right?
they're just trying to do life, trying to figure it out. And, like we're just kind of all trying to be there for each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's something that gets so overlooked, is that community really can be, obviously can be bad stories and whatever, but that community really can be powerful, especially in today's world where people are more and more disconnected.
Oh yeah.
From real human interaction,
Yeah, no, and it it was funny. There's this one guy at our church, and he's like everybody thinks that Christians have it figured out. We're the most screwed up people of anybody.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
It just made me laugh because I kind of liked that like there was like this sense of vulnerability with the people in these groups that like there was at no point did I ever feel like there was this, people trying to act like they had everything figured out or they had all the answers. And I don't really know why I kind of like felt like I had that perception going into the church. But I did, I really thought that like, these people know exactly what they believe.
Yeah.
And they, there's no more, they're not questioning anything. They're not struggling with any of this.
Yeah.
Like everything is black and white and it's good to go.
Yeah. You can find those communities some places.
Probably.
But I hear you. I mean, it's interesting to me because in a way that theme of community and real relationship and that in and of itself sort of being spiritual, like your friend group you mentioned several times and how important that was, that theme sort of comes back in this experience. Yeah.
And I would say that is a big theme in my life. It's just kind of that connection with others. Because it's the times where, for one reason or another that I feel like I kind of get like disconnected from others or just kind of isolated is like, sometimes those are the hardest times for me. Like I just get so much, it's so good for me to be with my community and with people. So yeah, it was good. I mean, it really made me feel very spiritual, honestly, just the deeper we got into it, I guess. And also, like, I don't think it's a coincidence either. Like, about the time we found the church is, like, right when, like, my mom started to kind of, like, that whole thing started. Yeah. And, like, I look back, it's one of those things I look back on, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, you had a community of support.
That's crazy.
There,
And I feel like that was just so integral in that little part of my life. So it was good.
Yeah. To have a faith community around you. And that's great. What does prayer life look like for you?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fascinated in that, hearing your story. It seems like there wasn't a lot of like,
no, I mean,
exposure to that. So like,
well, I remember even like trying to like, I mean, I say that there were times before that I prayed.
Yeah.
But not consistently by any means.
Foxhole prayers.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I promise if you get me out of this, God,
I really need you right now.
I'll never.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. When I really needed something. No, and that was also another, like, we talk about that discipline. Like, I kind of had to force myself to start doing that. And like, it's funny to see God too kind of show back up and like help me along with it, because he kind of like made me a part of some of these things that are now like ongoing in my life that we pray every time we're together, because I remember that being like, I would get anxiety over saying a prayer because I was like, I don't know what to say, and
it's a very vulnerable thing.
It is.
I believe it or not, as a priest of 16 years, I still like publicly extemporaneously saying a prayer still makes me nervous.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I mean, it's well, and you only have to come up with so many, I'm just kidding. I
feel like I say the same one every time.
But, hey, that's
my problem.
At least they know what to expect. Right? No, I mean that was part of it, is like just even learning how to pray. Yeah. And it's funny to look back and just see how much that part of my life has changed, because it's like it went from, if ever there was something wrong or bad or even good, I think I would pray. But now it is more like it's switched from like it's more relational conversation than it is like this speech, or this like to-do list or ask list.
Yeah, a genie in a bottle. Like,
yeah, exactly. And it's cool to see it kind of come out on the back end too. And like, I do try to always make sure that I pray that way, that it's more of a place from like gratefulness and like just appreciation.
It's one of my favorite quotes. It's from Meister Eckhart, and he said, "If the only prayer you ever pray in your life is thank you, that is enough."
Yeah,
and
cool.
I always try to keep that in mind. I'm also connect. I mean, what's interesting is like, people say this, and different denominations really focus on like, you have a personal relationship with God, this kind of thing, right? But I think, and that's what I hear you talking about. I mean, like until you sort of go through all that process of like, well, what's the right thing to say, and how do we do, and actually sort of finally break through all those barriers, and I know like we say these words, it's also, you can't really describe any of this, but like when like what does that really mean, right? To have a relationship with this thing we call God that we can't see and we can't, but it happens, and when you get there, then it again, it occurs to me that same theme is present in your life of like what you're really fed by is authentic, vulnerable relationship. So it would make sense that's, I don't know. Does that make sense? I mean, it's I can see that same journey there.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. And it's, it really has been about that for me. It's interesting that, I hate to keep sounding like a broken record, but just kind of when I look at the whole journey, and where I started and like where things, it wasn't like it just something hit me and everything was different.
Yeah.
It was kind of this more gradual growth, that didn't happen overnight. And, and I don't know that I can't imagine that it would have been any different, just from like based on where I started to where I am now. Cause, but it's been great. I mean, it's really cool to kind of reflect on it.
Yeah. Well, it's so cool for me because I get to hear all these people's stories. Is like people have these themes in their story. It's just so fascinating to me. I literally I don't know. I see it so clearly, and so with you, it just makes total sense that like we've seen it in various places that you've talked of like discipline, routine, coming back to it, the relationships. It's a theme, and that theme is completely different from other people's themes,
cool.
right? And it just seems so unique to each person, and I love that.
Yeah, and I agree with. I mean, again, like meeting other church members, like it's really cool to hear. Like, I think it kind of got rid of that idea that there was only one way to do it.
Yeah.
Because it was like I would hear these folks in these small groups or as men's groups, and like the way that they would interpret things or see things, was different from me. But I appreciated it. It was like, well, this is, and there was like, it wasn't just like one person felt this way and everybody, it was like everybody felt a little different, or saw things a little different, and it really did help me realize that that there is no one right way to do it. And everybody's on their own journey. And
I wish, sort of circling back to like this perception I have of especially younger generations, really, and numbers reflect this in the larger church, right? In general, mainline Christianity has been and continues to decline. But it's like I think if people understood the thing we're talking about, then that may not be the case. It's just that what's gotten advertised to people and what most people think any sort of religious institution is is like, yeah, this place where they're going to tell you exactly what to believe. And if you don't believe this, then you're wrong. And, you got to fit into all these things, when what we're talking about, again, is something that's indefinable, really, or undefinable.
No, it's cool, especially coming from church leaders to kind of hear that encouragement to people, because, I do think that there has to be a certain level of responsibility for the individual, because I take responsibility for feeling that way. Like when I was far from the church, like that's kind of on me for like creating these perceptions in my own head of what it was like, but I just think that part of it's probably human nature. Part of it is, there has been, you seem to, it's like, it's funny because it's like 90% of your life can be positive and 10% can be negative, but that 10% can sometimes feel like 90%.
If you're allowed to, can define everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that sometimes happens when people view faith like that too, where they like, what you're going to get from this and do from this is going to be like the vast majority of it is going to be really, really good.
Yeah.
And there could be a few times where like maybe you do disagree with someone, or like there's
some rubs.
Yeah, like some like uncomfortable feelings.
Sure.
Of like maybe there is like some beliefs that you're kind of like, whoa, like I don't know if I really feel like that. And I don't think that, like, I'm very fortunate that like I'm in a place with my church where like I've never ever felt that way there. But I could see that, sometimes like churches or, spiritual leaders will talk about some pretty big stuff.
Yeah.
And some people feel very passionate about certain things. And
right.
they can I think they attach it to their faith and their spirituality, and it unfortunately can kind of push them away a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's the same as, again, we were talking a little bit before we hit record of like, when one serves in a church, then you sort of see how the sausage is made. And some people, because they have such a like elevated expectation of what church is supposed to be, and it's only supposed to be fluffy clouds and happiness and yellow brick roads and whatever, then they're not able to handle seeing like the nitty gritty. Hey, we have to make a budget, and we have to like raise money. We have to keep the lights on, and you have to, and so didn't do something appropriate or whatever, isn't doing their job, and we have to probably let that person go. And you have all that stuff. Yeah,
I agree. I think that the little bit that I can kind of see behind the curtain a little bit with our church, it's like I've actually responded very positively to that, and I feel closer to our church knowing that like they're people just like me.
Right.
And I understand that people are not always gonna like be this like, they're not these perfect beings.
Sure.
That are just
well, that's what I mean. Like if you don't build up the church in that way, that is this place of perfection, then you're not gonna run into those issues. But a lot of people I think do. So I want to be respectful of your time. I don't know. I haven't even really kept track, but what would you say in what is a relatively new adventure experience for you? Well, before I ask that, the other thing I was going to say that has come up a couple times is it reminds me of like, we often like have people come to the church, and in the Episcopal Church, there's lots of traditions and there's lots of things, and people definitely like the same feelings you had, maybe even more, because they're like, wait, am I supposed to do this at this time? And do I need to, somebody did this weird thing and and I didn't know. Yeah. And we always say, fake it till you make it. Yeah. And it's funny, but it's actually serious, because it's even on a psychological level. I sort of hesitate to say this because I don't want to I could see certain people thinking that I'm basically this is like the psychology of religion, and thereby somehow arguing that maybe there's nothing to it. I don't know, but our brains are set up this way. This is real, where if we look for the negative all the time, we're going to see the negative all the time. If we look for the positive all the time, we're going to see the positive all the time. If we start to talk about God and look for God, that's back to the point of my, like, the spiritual disciplines, right? That's the point. Yeah. If you do this more and more, you will see this in your life.
Exactly.
You know, and so does that make sense? I'm not trying to, like, psychologize or whatever spirituality, but there is that. Like, if you just go into it and you start it and you do the practice, you will see the benefits. You will see those things in your life.
Exactly. No, and I hear you. I think that, you know, it's tough to explain this kind of stuff, but I think it's absolutely true. I mean, I think that, to your point, like, just us as human beings, like, it just makes sense. You know, it's like, if, you know, not to pull a Tony Robbins quote out, but I'm going to do it.
I like Tony Robbins quotes.
Yeah, I do too. I like it too. But, you know, he always says, where focus goes, energy flows. You know, so it's like, I agree with that. And sometimes I think about that little statement where it's like, if I'm focused on something, like, a lot of my energy and my attention goes to it. Yeah. Whereas if I'm not focused on it, it could come close to hitting me in the face, and I might not acknowledge it. So I just think that is part of us as human beings. We kind of have to do that for some of us, not everybody. Some people are, you know, have gifts that, you know, they don't necessarily need that part of the process, but I'm not one of them. You know, I think that I kind of need things to bring my focus, especially as we, you know, on a practical level, as we get busy in our lives, you know, it's like, I kind of need those things to pull my focus back into this, because not that it's intentional, but I can, like, start to kind of drift a little bit and, like, not think about it as much.
Well, and I guess my motivator with that observation was just, again, I keep harping, I don't mean to, I sound like the old guy, like, well, these young people, but, like, it's the unfortunate dynamic of this, of what we're talking about. You can't just sit down and explain that to someone and it work for them. Yeah. Or you can't convince someone who's resistant to this experience. You literally have to actually go in and walk a mile in someone's shoes. Like, you literally have to go and try it. Yeah. You know, in order to even begin to see any of what we're talking about. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, you hear this a lot too, but, you know, there has to be the openness from the other person. You know, if you're not ready to receive it, then you're not going to get it. So I think that can be difficult, I think, especially, like, I think about some of the folks in our church that are kind of tasked with, like, that outreach, you know, and, like, that mission work is, like, that can be a pretty tall order sometimes, because, you know, literally part of your job is to try to go out and bring people into the church. You know, in theory, we're all tasked to do that. But I am a big believer of, like, you know, you kind of have to start where people are. And it can, for some folks, it's a very long process. Yeah. You know, and it's not like you can just say the right thing and they're going to say, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I'll be there tomorrow.
Right. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, like the sidewalk preacher who's screaming at everybody's not converting, not getting anybody to go to church. Probably not a high
turnover rate. Yeah.
Do you know, actually, interestingly, so UT, every once in a while on the steps of the library would be
I do remember
somebody screaming, and I had long hair, and they would tell me I was going to hell because I had long hair and things like this. And I was a world religion major at the time. The only time I would ever skip class, because I loved studying that stuff, was if one of those guys were out there, because I wanted to talk to them. And I'll never forget it. I actually, like, sort of made friends with this one guy who was doing this. And it all made sense after, because what he explained to me is he said, I'm not doing this to convert people or to bring people to church. He said, this is my own act of, like, spiritual discipline. He said, like, the humiliation of getting out here and doing something that is horrifying and having all these people be here. And so, not that I agree with that or think that's a great thing to do, but it finally made sense for me, because I was always like, you're not, like, bringing people to church like this, you know? Like, this isn't working, bub. Yeah. You know, so anyway.
No, well, you bring up something that I think that is very interesting, and it further proves, I think, that you never know what people are truly going through. And, like, I have to really watch myself too, to, like, because I think, you know, we all, whether we try not to or whatever, like I think we still kind of make snap judgments.
Sure.
You know, like everybody does it. But I've also like, that's just a perfect example of like, we had it completely wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like this person we thought this person was doing it for us or whatever.
His motivation was different than
and really it was like kind of just part of his process, and like I don't know, that's I find that very interesting.
So what I was going to ask you, and this can be our kind of wrap up because I'm pretty sure I've kept you, but same thing I ask everyone at the end of every episode, really, but I sort of attach a little bit to this with you, like. So do you have, and the answer can be no, but like, do you have a most powerful or clear or significant, quote unquote, spiritual experience, right?
Yeah.
In your life? What would you point to? And I also want to add on to that, like, since you are so relatively kind of new into that journey,
right?
In your faith walk, is there anything that you would point to that has been just like a deep learning for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, yes, to answer your question, but I don't know that I could, really verbalize. I mean, it was such a, like, I'm going to answer the second question first, and then we'll go back to the first one you asked. But, I mean, for me, it was kind of like, just to kind of package it all into one thing, it was really just this changing of perception of like what I thought from the beginning of it, and like looking down the road of what I thought it was to like where I am now and looking back.
Yeah.
Like my perception completely changed on what I thought I was going to experience or what it was going to be like, for good, for it was much better. And it made me much more comfortable around everybody in my life, because I got to see some of these people that were much older than me in a lot of cases being very vulnerable, and just laying their struggles out there, or, hey, like I'm really struggling with this. And like, I trust you guys to be able to talk to you about it. And that was very powerful for me, because I'm just like, really? You trust me, and you would share that with me, and like trust that like I want to like support you in that. Like that was just like so cool to me.
I think people are starving for that.
I would agree. So any place that I can find that now, I'm running to it. Whereas I think before I would kind of run from it, just because I was like scared, or
they're gonna try to get me to come to church.
Exactly. But no, I mean, it's like, it is though. Like once you get that and you feel that, it's like, you just want more of it. So that's been really cool. Just in my whole experience. But I would say probably like one of the biggest, and not to end on I don't think it's a negative note, but like it's when my mom passed, like that was a very huge spiritual time for me, because like I had like all this anxiety and this fear of like really just what it was going to be like on the other side of that. Like I was like, how am I going to feel after she's gone?
Complete unknown.
And it's like, and just there were, a number of other things that I was just worried about that I shouldn't have been. But, it's like looking back on that whole process, like God got me through that in a way that I'll never be able to repay. It was amazing. And he still is, I'm still, it's going to,
it's
be a part of my life forever. Right.
Yep.
But like something that was interesting about that part, or that time, was, my mom's service was on a Saturday night, and I went to a service on the Friday night before. I went to a service that Saturday morning, and then I went to my mom's. Wow. And then I went to a service that following Tuesday night.
Wow.
But like, and that was just kind of the way it all happened. And like, it was interesting because it made me realize that as big and as huge and overwhelming as my loss was, there were all these other people that had these losses right beside me. And
That tracks, dude. That's the same
Yeah.
theme throughout this entire conversation,
Yeah.
right? It's that
Yeah.
vulnerability, that authenticity, that community.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I just kind of felt like this connection with the people around me to just like, send my spirit and my, wrap my arms around them.
Yeah.
And it was just really cool because it really just for some reason kind of grounded me through that whole process.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that and for your vulnerability. I think that's, it's a beautiful example and a beautiful way to end because it just sort of puts a bow on what I feel like has kind of been the heart of this whole conversation. Because it really is about that openness and vulnerability and connection with real relationship with people, realness, right? It sounds so weird to say. I mean, you prefaced that to say it's weird to say, but that's like a common, we as clergy, we deal with death all the time.
Yeah.
And we constantly say, I bet you there's not a single clergy person that would listen to this who would disagree with me. Like, ironically, oddly, death for us is almost always the most holy thing that we participate in. And why is that? Well, it's because we're walking intimately, vulnerably, authentically with these people who are doing a very human thing, which we all do, right? Yeah. And we suffer and grapple with death and grieve. And so it's sort of for like that thing we just said people are starving for. Yeah. Death sort of forces us all there.
Yeah.
Right. Whether we like it or not, we're going to the core,
Right. Yeah. No, that is really interesting. And, and I do think about that a lot with even like the leaders at our church, our pastors, like that, I like feel this need to kind of lift them up too, because, it is hard to kind of like constantly, I think, be walking with those people through these hard times. I mean, you can't help but feel, just like you want to lift them up and wrap your arms around them, and I'm sure it's obviously you guys know it's part of the job, and like you're called to do it. But it is just, I think about that a lot too. And again, it just kind of deepens my perspective on, not to say that, each person's struggles and things they're all unique. I'll say that. But they're also, I think we are meant to kind of all do this together. And it just like, I don't know, it's like a weird feeling, when you go through that, death is part of life. And it's coming whether we want it to or not.
The great equalizer.
Yes. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, and I know I've said it 100 times already, but like, yes, we're supposed to do all this together, and that's happening less and less.
Yeah.
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 Which is kind of scary. But
it is.
Well, I can say from the perspective of a priest or pastor or whatever, your desire to lift your pastor up is appreciated. So keep doing it, man. That's people like that who recognize that and think in that way are blessings. So that's
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Anything else you want to point to, say, talk about?
I don't think so. No, I just just want to commend you for doing this. I mean, I think this is really cool.
Thanks, man.
What you're doing. I mean, it's I'll be honest, going into it, I was like pretty nervous, I was like, oh man, this is like, we gotta go deep for an hour.
Oh dude, it's gone so fast.
It has. Yeah, it's been great. And like, you just do such a good job of like, I don't know, kind of directing the orchestra, if you will. So I appreciate it. This has been great. Man,
thanks. I appreciate your willingness, and thanks for sharing. Once again, just in case, plug your insurance.
Oh yeah,
business,
I mean,
for folks.
Of course, happy to help anybody, but it's First Light Insurance Group, independent insurance agency. So obviously, represent a number of carriers, but more importantly, represent the person that needs help, which is why I like being an independent agent. So if anybody does need help, of course, more than happy to do that.
And they can just Google that and find you here in
Yeah,
Knoxville.
firstlightInsuranceGroup.com is my website, and you can find all my info on there for sure.
Jordan Simmons. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks for doing this with me, and blessings on that new adventure.
Thank you.
And on Laura and the kiddos, and
Appreciate it.
maybe we'll chat again on here sometime.
That'd be awesome. I appreciate it.
All right, brother.
Thanks.